Have you heard of financial infidelity? Our expert is going to help us out next on Smart Money. Welcome to Smart Money. I'm Julia Anderson here with my co-host Pat Boyle, and we're talking about financial infidelity. And our guest today is Juliet Lakel, who is a divorce attorney, a book author, and she hosts Instagram and Facebook accounts and has a lot to tell us about financial infidelity and why it's such a big deal in a divorce. Before we get to Juliet, I want to just share with you a little bit about what we're talking about. Infidelity can come in all kinds of flavors. Credit card debt that you haven't told your spouse about. Maybe you've got a gambling problem. There's other ways to not share with your spouse that can cause you trouble with your money. The worst case I ever heard of was a woman who was married to a contractor, and he knew he was going to be leaving his wife, and so he declared bankruptcy and then sued her for half the value of her business, which she then had to shell out to him. It was a really, really rough one. So let's bring in Juliet Lakel, a good friend of mine and an expert on all these things. And let's get started with a question from Pat.
Julia talked about undisclosed credit card debt. That's one kind of financial infidelity. What are some other kinds that you can tell us about?
Sure. I think undisclosed credit card debt is a big one. I think financial infidelity can also mean reckless spending. So that could be maybe a spouse has a spending problem and they are spending money, not telling their spouse about it. I had a case recently where a spouse had a storage shed with a bunch of stuff in it, from electronics to clothing to sporting goods that the other spouse didn't know anything about. I think it can also mean bank accounts or other financial accounts that a spouse is unaware of, or accounts that might only be in one spouse's name, unbeknownst to the other spouse. I think financial infidelity also may be withdrawals or loans against a 401k where the spouse is unaware of that. It might also be a spouse giving money or loaning money to a friend or family member and not conferring with their spouse about it. So it can take a lot of different shapes and sizes for sure.
Interesting to me is that there was a survey by the National Endowment for Financial Education, a large survey of average Americans, and the surprise was that a lot of them admitted to being financially unfaithful, maybe in small ways or maybe not so small ways, like borrowing from your 401k without telling your spouse about it. How do you avoid this sort of thing? What can a couple do? What's your advice?
Sure. Well, I think communication and transparency as early on in a marriage, and even before a marriage. So, for example, in my practice, part of my practice, I draft and negotiate prenuptial agreements. And I always tell my client, you got to start talking about the money stuff now, even before you get married, because it will only get harder. If you can't have the hard conversations about money, what your expectations are about money before marriage, it likely isn't going to get any better after. But if you're already married, then it's starting that communication, that open and transparent communication about your expectations on money. Who's going to manage it? Who's going to pay bills? Are you going to have regular financial check-ins? Are there thresholds for spending? For example, we don't spend any more than, say, $500 without talking to our spouse about it. And communication about your different accounts. What kind of accounts do you have? And are both your names on it? Are accounts just going to be in one spouse's, and why? So I think communication really is the key there.
I just thought of this as you were talking. I just want to throw this out there. Is it a different conversation for people who are married for the first time compared to people who are having a second or third marriage? Is the conversation different?
Yeah, I think oftentimes it can be, especially for those individuals that are getting married at a younger age. They may not have a lot of wealth accumulated or retirement accounts. They might have some. I think the transparency is still the same for both. But people that are in a second or third marriage, they're talking about not only kind of all of the assets that they've accumulated or debts, could be debts as well, but they also might have other expectations about their money in terms of, what happens if one of them passes away? Do they have children from a prior marriage? Are they creating some estate planning documents? Does the other spouse need to be aware of what's in those estate planning documents? And again, as I've said before, it's the communication, it's the transparency, and making sure that the spouses have very clear expectations about money, whatever stage of life that they are in.
As an attorney, if you're dealing with someone going through a divorce, how do you make sure there's not financial cheating going on? Do you have a checklist that you have your client fill out, or how do you do it?
That's a good question. I don't go into a case thinking that somebody has cheated financially or otherwise, but it may become apparent to me, or a flag might be raised based on how my own client is answering questions for me or comments they are making. And sometimes I definitely get a spouse that comes in and says, I think my spouse is hiding money, or I think something's happened. But for example, it's happened a handful of times where my client comes in and says, oh, well, we refinanced our house last year. And I was really surprised. I thought we were going to take cash out to go on vacation or to do a renovation. And there wasn't that much equity in our home. We ended up paying a lot of debt. And so that immediate is like, oh, well, did you know what the debts were? Did you see the settlement statement at closing? What was paid off? Were you aware you had these credit cards? Did you see the transactions? And then sometimes like I said, I do get clients that come in and have those concerns. And so we start dissecting them with either looking at some basic documents like pay stubs or bank statements and seeing if you can reconcile. Oh, it shows that your spouse earns this on their pay stub. Is that what's going into your checking account? If an account is listed on the pay stub for a direct deposit, are those the bank statements that we have? So there's some basic things you can try and tease out at a very kind of basic level to see whether there has been some infidelity, financial infidelity. For extreme cases, we may employ a professional like a forensic accountant to really deal with that.
And they can track down some of those secret accounts. So let's say, yeah, good, yeah.
Yes.
And do they do that with a social security number, or how do they do that?
You can do that, but just like in the example that I gave with a bank account statement, one thing that we all can do is we look at our bank account statement, and if it's a joint account with our spouse, we should be looking at transactions. Have there been withdrawals? Have there been transfers? And on the bank statement, it will tell you if it's been transferred, the last 4 digits typically of the account that it's gone to. Do you know about that account? And if you don't, then you have another question and another kind of trail to follow.
That makes total sense. So let's say we are getting to a divorce. There is going to be a divorce. And this is a broad question, but how do we know it's financially fair? I'm particularly interested in that because I think a lot of women take a hit from a divorce that men may or may not take the same hit because they may be caring for children, working half-time, whatever. What's a fair financial settlement, Juliet?
Oh my gosh, that literally could be $1 million question.
Yeah,
it's very case specific. All divorces are. There is not a one size fits all, and I think that applies with settlements or resolutions as well, depending on your circumstances. What might be fair in a marriage that lasted 2 years could be very different than one that lasted 20 years. Are both spouses employed? Has one been at home raising the kids? That may lead to a totally different result if both spouses have good paying jobs. So I think it's really, really very case specific. And for anybody that's in those circumstances, either looking at divorce or in the midst of one, you really have to get good advice either from a lawyer or a financial advisor to help you figure out, is this fair for me? Will I be okay with what is being discussed as a settlement? And that's not just at this moment in time, will I be okay in this moment of time, but also looking at it from 5 years or 10 years, or when and if you hit retirement age.
So what is the best state in which to get a divorce? I know Washington is a community property state, Oregon is not, and then there are states that are no-fault divorce states. Could you explain the difference of each of them?
Yeah, okay. So a no-fault divorce state, let's take that last question there, basically means that you don't have to have a reason other than a breakdown in your marriage to get divorced. You don't have to assert that there's been abuse or infidelity. You can just say our marriage is irretrievably broken or we have irreconcilable differences. The language varies from state to state, but that's what you allege, and the court can grant you a divorce. By the same token, in a no-fault divorce, even if you have abuse or infidelity, a judge is not supposed to penalize you for that in a financial settlement or a property and debt division. They are supposed to treat you both as unbiased as possible. So that's what a no-fault state means, or that legal concept of no-fault divorce. In terms of community property state, so Washington is one of 9 community property states in the United States. And at a basic level, community property means all assets or debts that are accumulated during the course of a marriage are presumed to be community in nature, meaning you have an equal interest in them, or if it's a liability, an equal responsibility for them. In a divorce in a community property state, some of those community property states also start with a presumption that those community assets and community liabilities will be divided 50-50. The caveat to that for Washington, although I get on a regular basis people coming in and talking with me about, well, isn't it just going to be 50-50 down the middle? That isn't exactly what our statute says for dividing property and debts upon divorce. Our statute actually says that all property is before the court for a just and equitable division. In some cases, that may be an equal division, and in other cases, it may not. Again, going back to Julia's question, it's so fact specific for each case. In states like Oregon and a number of other states in the country, they're considered equitable distribution states. And they characterize property as marital property or non-marital property. Marital property being what's been acquired during the course of the marriage. And in equitable distribution states, the property is to be divided equitably or fairly. And that may not be equal. So to answer your question or circle back to it, the difference in Oregon and Washington may not be that different in terms of a divorce, because we have community property, but it's to be divided just and equitably. And in Oregon, there is equitable distribution. They may come out with the same result. They may be different.
So have you seen couples who are on the verge of a divorce pull back from that by going to some sort of financial counseling where they lay it out on the table and confess their prior faults in terms of credit card secret charges and that sort of thing? Have you seen people be able to reverse that by just getting honest with each other?
Yeah, I have seen over the years cases where people have pulled back on the divorce and they've gotten a handle on their finances. I would guess that a number of those, the fix, if you will, is temporary, and divorce ultimately is what transpires. I can think of one case right now where the financial infidelity really wasn't a financial issue, but a mental health issue. And I think that probably happens more often than not. It's not necessarily a financial issue, but there is an underlying mental health issue. The case that I'm thinking about is a husband who had bipolar, and was undiagnosed for a period of time. And in the phases of bipolar, which, as we know from many years ago, was called manic depression, there are highs and lows. And on the highs, he was spending wildly. In that case, once they figured out that it was a mental health issue and he got treatment for that, then the marriage was able to reconcile and lasted. I was still in contact with this couple for a number of years until the husband passed away 3 or 4 years ago. So looking at that from, is it a financial issue or is there a mental health issue, is also really important, because the financial infidelity could be a symptom of a mental health issue.
The latest stats show that about 15,000 divorces in Oregon compared to 41,000 in Washington. The rate, though, per 1,000 marriages is about the same at 2.7 per 1,000 people. I guess the divorce rates are down from 20 years ago, but the question is not about that. It's about the younger generation, many of whom are deciding, let's just live together and not tie the knot officially, have that piece of paper, as it were. What's your advice for them?
Yeah, I love that you brought that statistic up, because it's curious, isn't it? Well, our divorce rates seem to be down, but then our marriage rates are also down because younger people or people just are choosing not to get married. So that does correlate, I believe, to the divorce rate. I'm not a statistician, but I think it does. In terms of the question, though, Pat, so if you're just going to live together, what do we do? Do we treat it any differently than a marriage? I think you still have to have the open and transparent communication and clear expectations about how you're going to manage money in that living together arrangement. Who's paying the bills? So questions to ask. Who's paying the bills and what bills are they paying? Are you moving into your significant other's home, or is he or she moving into yours? If they do that, does that give a rise? If they're helping you make the mortgage payment or paying bills related to the home, does that give rise to them having some kind of claim on your home? There are just a handful of questions related to that. And I think what I counsel, if you're serious, and I would imagine if you're living together with somebody, you probably are serious, then you need to have those serious conversations, because if something happens in the relationship or the relationship terminates, then what happens with the home? If you live together for 5 years and you suddenly have to find another new home because it was your significant other's property, are you just out in the dark for all the money that you put to, add a deck or remodel the bathroom or whatever it is? I mentioned earlier on about conversations I have with clients over prenuptial agreements, and when we're negotiating those and being able to talk about the hard stuff, the money stuff. You can have the same type of agreements in a living together arrangement. People are not always aware of that, but we call them cohabitation agreements, where it spells out all of those things. Who's paying for what bills? Will you acquire any property together? What happens if you break up? How soon does somebody have to move out of the house? If you bought the house together, when does it have to be listed for sale, or the other one buy you out? And how is that determined? So you can have agreements that clearly set the tone for expectations, rights, and remedies.
Very interesting. I did not know about that. So it's called a cohabitation agreement, which is for people who choose to move in together but and share the bills, but they aren't married. So that's really good to know about. So we added one more question here for you, and that has to do with other recourse for financial justice, shall we say, if someone has committed a financial fraud or otherwise violated the rules. So what's that option?
Okay. So there could be a couple things that you could do depending on, and again, laws vary in different states, but just a little while ago, I was telling you about equitable distribution, which Oregon is that state. Washington is community property, and we have a just and equitable division of property. So it may be that you present to your decision maker, i.e. a judge or arbitrator or mediator, that there has been some financial infidelity, and just and equitable or an equitable distribution of property means the spouse who didn't commit the infidelity should receive a larger piece of the pie, if you will. That's one option that spouses who are the victim of financial infidelity would have. The other is an area of law that's called marital waste or marital dissipation of assets. Again, laws vary in different states, but what you're essentially alleging is that a spouse wasted marital or community property assets, and there was no reciprocal benefit to the marriage or to the spouses of the marriage. And so you do have to demonstrate that it was wasteful and there was no benefit. I say that because, let's say, for example, take that example of a spouse withdrawing money from the 401k and the other spouse didn't know about it. Is that marital waste? It might be, but if that spouse withdrew the money and paid off medical bills, it may not be. So again, very fact specific. As I mentioned, laws regarding this differ in different states. Some states require a showing that the waste was committed around the time that the marriage was in breakdown or deteriorating, or within a year before the filing of divorce. So good to check that out wherever you are and to consult with a lawyer to see whether that marital waste argument would be applicable.
Thank you for that. I didn't know about that either. So we've been talking with Juliette Lako, a divorce attorney and book author. You can find her books on Amazon. The titles are, I better look and make sure I get it right, Divorce Wisdom and Bits of Divorce Wisdom. They're great and they've been out for a while, and I know a lot of people are reading them. You can find her on Instagram, Facebook, and at her website. And we want to thank you, Juliette, for covering some territory that we hadn't talked to you about before, and that's financial infidelity. So thank you so much.
Yes, great topic. Thank you.
Thanks.
For more information, go to my website at 60andsingle.com.